Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the October 2020 Sydney Skeptics in the Pub online. My name is Richard Saunders from the Australian Skeptics and the Skeptic Zone podcast. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land from which we are broadcasting today. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. You may also like to know that you can subscribe to the Skeptic magazine, the journal from Australian Skeptics. It's the latest issue. Just hit your postbox now if you are a subscriber. You can also get the digital copy of that magazine. That magazine's been in print now for almost 40 years. And you can access most back issues of that magazine for free at skeptics.com.au. Also, please join us later this month for Skepticon 2020, again online, the Australian Skeptics National Convention. This year we have a host of international and local speakers who all saved a lot of money and jet lag this year because they can all do it from their respective locations. Tune in to see who will win the Australian Skeptics Ben Spoon Award, awarded to the most preposterous piece of paranormal or pseudoscientific piffle. That's the 23rd to the 25th of this month, and you can get more information and buy your tickets at skepticon.org.au. Next month, we will have another speaker, and we're just in negotiations for that, so stay tuned and check the Australian Skeptics for more details or the meetup group. Now to introduce tonight's speaker. Ben Radford is Deputy Editor of Skeptical Inquirer Science Magazine and a research fellow with the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. He has written thousands of articles on a wide variety of topics, including urban legends, the paranormal, critical thinking, and media literacy. He is also the co-host of the very popular Squaring the Strange podcast, and I never miss an episode of that. Ben believes in thorough and careful skeptical investigation and has travelled far and wide, not to Australia just yet, but I'm sure one day. He has travelled far and wide to get to the bottom of many mysteries, including the infamous chupacabra monster, or goat sucker, a more recent addition to the family of cryptozoology. A couple of years ago, I had the rare pleasure of visiting Ben in his home in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And while I was there, Ben took a photograph of me on a desert highway just out of town. When we looked back at the photograph later, we noticed a UFO behind me in the sky. This is no joke. And we're still puzzling over that a little bit today. Tonight, Ben will discuss some of his adventures and investigations into ghosts and hauntings, certainly one of my favorite topics. Now, there will only be a short time for questions after the talk, owing to the very, very, very late hour, or very, very early hour in Albuquerque, New Mexico, depending on how you look at it. And heaven knows, Ben does need his beauty sleep. You can find a link to ask your questions on the Twitch page in the comments, I believe. But now, Ben Radford, all the way from Albuquerque, New Mexico, welcome to Sydney Skeptics in the Pub.
This is very cool. Thanks for having me. This is fun. Any other time I'd be joining you lifting a pint or two. If you want me to get through the talk, I'll be teetotaling for this time. But this is very cool. Thanks for inviting me. Very good. Well, I wanted to when I was talking to Richard about what do you want to talk about? Of course, ghosts are one of my in my bailiwicks, as they say, and the challenge is always how do you bring so much to, how do you tackle such a broad topic? And ghosts are one of my favorite things. That's one of the things that of course Richard and I share. And so this evening I wanted to sort of talk some about ghost investigation generally and how one brings science to investigating ghosts. And then for the second part, sort of touch on a couple So a couple of my presentations and investigations that are better known, and sort of give an overview in a case study. A lot of times in skeptical investigations, I found case studies are really interesting because you can really dig deep into a case. It's one thing to sort of dabble and say, oh, there's this this happened, that happened, but oftentimes these cases are very involved, and when you're doing skeptical investigations, you need to really dig into it and do a deep dive, as they say. And so a lot of times what I've found really useful in my own research is when I do see other investigators, such as Randy or Massimo Polidoro or Richard or anyone else, really dig into something, not just sort of give a quick overview and go on. So I want to talk a little bit about some aspects of ghost beliefs and ghost experiences that may not be obvious. When people think about ghosts, usually it's in the context of ghost stories. People, scary legend stories about going to some part of the woods and you'll be seeing some apparition, or there'll be a haunted location. And I've read many accounts of them, of course, in Sydney and elsewhere, where there's supposed to be one area that has some specific ghost. So it's the widow of somebody who's out at sea, for example, or on a ghost walk, and she's seen on moonless nights going along a trail or something, wishing for the return of her lover, things like that. And one thing that I find especially interesting about ghost investigations and reports is the fairly recent. It's a fairly recent phenomenon, not ghost experiences specifically, because ghost experiences and ghost reports are actually among the most universal and timeless. So unlike, for example, reports of the Bigfoot or the Yowie or UFO reports or whatever else, ghosts are they're their own category, because cultures all around the world have stories and beliefs about the ancestors and spirits that may be invoked and spoken to, hopefully having them speak back at you, of course. And so the idea that you could contact the dead is an ancient idea. But the idea that you could prove that you contacted the dead is a fairly recent one. And by that I mean that when you go back and you look at stories and cultural ideas about what ghosts are and what they do and how they function, and the ghost rules, if you will. Typically, when people contacted the dead, when people interface with spirits, it was on a, if you forgive the pun, a spiritual level. It was not. It wasn't something done on reality TV, of course, because that's fairly recent. So typically, historically, when people talked about and had this notion of communicating with the dead or the undead or the things beyond the veil, if you will, they were talking about the dead they were speaking about were their forefathers. They were their great grandfathers. It was spirits that may not have ever actually interacted with in real life, but were part of a lineage. And the idea, the more modern notion, that, for example, a ghost hunter would go to a location and investigate ghosts or try to communicate with some spirit that they had no personal connection to, is a very new one. And so that's why, for example, when you see these TV shows, Ghost Adventures, Ghost Hunters, all these spin-offs in their ilk, they're the sort of, dude, bro, let's go in the ghost, let's go find a ghost, man. It's like, oh, yeah, what was that? Everybody's freaking out. The lights are off. It's this big pseudo dramatic fiasco, really. But that notion would be foreign to people even 200-300 years ago. They would say, well, why would you go somewhere to communicate with a dead person that you didn't know in life? There's no connection. They're not part of your family. There's no the idea that you would even want to, or that a spirit would want to contact you, conversely, would be very strange. Just because there was no personal connection to it. Like, yeah, I can go to some haunted location anywhere in the world and try to investigate ghosts. And the question is, why in the hell would a ghost in a German castle talk to Ben Radford of Albuquerque, New Mexico in 2020, right? And that changed around about 150 years ago, give or take, with the emergence of spiritualism. And that was when, and I don't have time to go into the whole story, but for those who know the general overview, there were these two sisters, the Fox sisters, Kate and Maggie Fox, in Hydesville, New York, actually not too far from where I used to work and live in Buffalo, New York. And they had this elaborate story of having communicated through raps and knocks with a murdered peddler. And these two young sisters at the time had told the story, and that they had communicated with this spirit, and through knocks, once for yes, two for no, that sort of thing. Which, as you can imagine, is a pretty clunky way of doing it, especially if you're trying to get a whole story out of it. Anyway, they were telling their family and friends and neighbors that they were having this actual physical, corporeal, auditory communication with the ghost. And they later confessed it was a hoax. Many years later, decades later, in fact, Kate and Maggie admitted they had made the whole thing up. It was sort of a childhood prank that got out of hand. It's also a childhood prank that spawned a religion. And at the time, between about the mid 1800s to the early 1900s here in the States, spiritualism was a huge enterprise. It was widely believed. Today, it's much less believed. There's a couple places in America where there's a small group that still believe it. One is in Lilydale, New York. Another one is in Camp Chesterfield I think in Florida. But at the time, again, this was the late 1800s in the States. People were coming from miles around to be in the presence of these two young girls that could, apparently, unlike everybody else, communicate with the spirit. But one thing that did was, for the first time, it sort of democratized the idea that spirits could be communicated with by the layperson. Right? Because previous to that, the idea was that ghosts and spirits, they existed, but they could be accessed and communicated to through priests or through shamans or through taking hallucinogens or other planes of consciousness, and that sort of crystallized, that sort of changed. Again, when the Fox sisters began doing their tricks, it later got sort of transported over to Victorian England. And this is when, during World War I and II, you see the emergence of the Ouija board. So all of a sudden, people are taking this parlor game with the planchette moving around the board, spelling things out, which, as you can imagine, is much more amenable to ghost stories than knocks, right? Because if you're communicating with a ghost and all it can do is that, well, again, you can, is there something here? Yes. Okay. What's your name? Then they would spell out, if it's Julia, the 10th letter, 9th letter would be J. So you would knock out 10 raps, whatever else. So as you can imagine, this was pretty clunky. And then with the Ouija board, it was much easier because then you could quickly spell out letters. And again, at this point, this is when the public idea of ghost communication became sort of more accessible. People started, well, okay, I guess you don't need to be a shaman, you don't need to be a priest, you don't need to have any sort of quasi religious media between them. And that's when you began to see the emergence of institutions, primarily in the U.S. and in London, that were dedicated to the trying to understand whether ghosts existed. So you had, for example, the Society for Psychical Research, established in 1882 in London, and still going on to this day, where you had groups of people that were taking academic interest in trying to figure out, okay, are ghosts real? Are these ghost photos that we're seeing by William Mumler and others, are they legitimate? Usually the answer was no, of course. And around this time, of course, you also had the emergence of the skeptics. This is when people like Harry Houdini were going around and exposing, in many cases, fraudulent mediums who were pretending to communicate with the ghosts, and the mediums were a direct result and can be traced right back to the Fox sisters, because again, it was the first time in human history, really, when people were saying that not only do ghosts exist, but there are ways to prove that, or ways to potentially prove that, through knocks, through raps, through spirit photographs, through ectoplasm, through seances and things like that. So the other part I want to hit on is that when you look at ghost experiences, and you look at ghost reports, they're very different in terms of what ordinary average people conceive of ghosts. They're very different than, for example, what you see on television or in films, right? Because of course it's heavily dramatized, right? If you want to make a movie about something, a scary ghost, you go for The Exorcist. You go for some demonic possession. You go for a built-in sort of theology about demons and good and bad and evil and things like that. Or you bring in, the Poltergeist movies or the Amityville Horror Stories, and you have these in some cases based on a true story, which, as you can guess, were not in fact based on a true story. But they draw upon lots of popular tropes about what ghosts are and things like that. But if you look at the phenomenology of ghosts, if when you talk to people, as I do, and you're interviewing people, and you're saying, okay, you say you had the ghost experiences. What was that? Right? They're not talking about anything dramatic. They're not talking about objects flying off walls. They're not saying anything dramatic. For the most part, when ordinary average people talk about ghosts, when they say I had a ghost experience, that actually covers a very, very wide, I would argue impossibly wide, collection of things. So for some people, a ghost experience is going into a room and feeling warmth, feeling love. So I've talked to people who believe there's a ghost in their house, and I'll say that's interesting. I'm obviously a skeptic, but I'm open-minded. I'd like to hear your story. And I say, well, how do you experience a ghost? I mean, what does the label ghost mean to you? Because you have to understand it from their perspective, of course. And oftentimes it's something that is very liminal. It's very subjective. It's nothing demonstrable, first of all, and it's nothing falsifiable. And oftentimes it's subjective, right? And so, as I mentioned, oftentimes people will say, I know there's a ghost in my house because they'll have small objects that are missing. For example, it's common for people to report ghost reports, report ghost experiences where their keys are missing, or there will be some small household object they place in the kitchen, and they're distracted for a minute by the telephone. They come back and it's gone, and their interpretation is, well, it's Martha the ghost. Come on, Martha, quit playing games here. I'm busy. And then sooner or later they'll find the keys in the other room, sometimes where they went in the other room to answer the phone, whatever else. So, but the key here is that for the most part, these are mundane topics they're mundane experiences that really could be attributable to anything. It just in that particular framework, within the worldview and the belief system, they're assuming and they're attributing otherwise ordinary phenomena to some spiritual entity, some ghostly entity. And again, this is very, very different than the sort of dramatic, sensational, scary, terrifying experiences that are, of course, dramatized and hyped up, in some cases fabricated for TV shows. So again, I love ghosts are one of my favorite topics. I ended up writing a whole book on it just because when I was doing these investigations for many years, I realized that they really are their own category. Is just so intricate, and I've researched, as Richard mentioned, lake monsters and crop circles and urban legends, whatever else. But ghosts were sort of its own rabbit hole, if you will. There's ghost photographs. There's EVP, which are electronic ghost phenomena, allegedly voices recorded from the dead. There's the psychology, and Richard Wiseman and Chris French and other psychologists have looked into this. So there's lots of angles into it. I don't have time to touch on all of them, but I wanted to sort of give a couple examples of specific ghost investigations that I've done to sort of show you how I approach it. So with that, I will begin my slideshow. Alrighty then. So there I am investigating ghosts. Looks suitably dramatic, I hope. So this is the cover that of the book that I mentioned just a minute ago. It came out a couple years ago. It won a book award at some point. I guess I snuck by it. Snuck by them. That's on the cover. There's a photograph. That's the famous Raynham Hall ghost. That is a double exposure. We know that for a fact, and almost certainly not a ghost, but it's a famous one. So I thought I would hit on that. So, as I mentioned, I've investigated hundreds of ghost reports, most in the States, but all around. There's the White Witch of Rose Hall in Jamaica, Myrtle's Plantation, Louisiana, the Santa Fe Courthouse Ghost, the Chemo Theater, the La Posada Hotel, Old Cochilla. These are the last couple of ones here in my home state of New Mexico. And unfortunately, when Richard was here, we had time to go look for green chili, which is super tasty, unlike those musk sticks, which Richard has continually tried to pass off on me, and I have not forgotten that, Richard. Anyway, I'm going to focus on two of my more famous and, in many ways, more interesting ghost stories and ghost investigations, the Haunted Chemo Theater and the Santa Fe Courthouse Ghost. So I'll begin with the Chemo Theater. And unfortunately, as when Richard was here, we didn't have enough time to really go to some of the locations here in New Mexico. New Mexico is a weird place. We've got Roswell, we've got the Aztec UFO crash, we have all sorts of weirdness, including the Chemo Theater. So if any of you manage to make it back here to Albuquerque, I can take you on a quick tour of this. This is it's one of the most famous haunted theaters in the Southwest, and it's only about maybe a 15-20 minute drive from where I am right now. And here's the story of the Chemo Theater Ghost. So the Chemo Theater was built in 1926, the same year Houdini died, for those Houdini aficionados. No connection. And opened its doors in 1927. It's located downtown, and it still looks very much like that image right there. It has a really unique architecture that combines the Art Deco style with Native American motifs. So there's thunderbirds and these really ornate images all over it, and it's one of the city's best-known landmarks. And the Chemo Theater Ghost is of particular interest to me for a couple reasons. One is it's a well-known hometown ghost, and I didn't investigate it until fairly recently. So I had done quite a few investigations into ghosts all over the place, and then finally someone said, "Well, hey Ben, what have you done in the Chemo Theater?" And, it's always like, what have you done for me lately, right? It's like, well, yeah, you've done all these, but what about this one? Oh, you explain that one. What about these, right? This the curse of the investigative skeptic. But I said, okay, fine. Yes, it's well known. I hadn't really tackled it. Let me look into it. And as with many ghost stories all around, and particularly, of course, in Sydney as well, you have local ghost stories, and every now and then, maybe on an anniversary of some event or for Halloween, the story will be revived. So there'll be TV shows, book chapters, and sure enough, Every Halloween here in Albuquerque, somebody, sometimes more than one somebody, brings up the Chemo Theater ghost as well. Of course, it's this famous local ghost. And so finally, I just said, okay, well, let me look into it. So here's the story of the Chemo Theater ghost. So the theater was successful for the first quarter century, and it had a bunch of early Hollywood films. And like many ghost stories, there is a grain of truth to it in that there was an actual tragedy there. So just before 4 o'clock on Thursday, August 2nd, 1951, there was an explosion. There were a bunch of people there to go see an Abbott and Costello film, and the water heater supplying the concession stand exploded into the lobby. And again, this is a true story. This is documented. Here's the cover of the Albuquerque Journal, at the time one of the two newspapers. Unfortunately, it's unfortunately the other newspaper is no longer. As with many places, journalism is dying, which is why I always encourage people to subscribe to print media, particularly local journalism. I come from a long line of journalists, so I always encourage people to, when they can, support local journalism. Anyway, so in this case, this is what happened. The theater blast kills boy, 7 hurt, and the only person that died is that little boy there on the left, Bobby Jamal the second. And he is supposed to be the ghost of the Chemo Theater. So in researching this, one of the first steps is to go over all the different versions or motifs or incarnations that you can find of the story, right? So there'll be newspaper accounts, there'll be in some cases folklore books and whatever else, and so that's one of the first tasks that I have as an investigator in looking into a case, is trying to survey the literature and saying, okay, well, what are people saying? And, which of these stories are just repeating others, which ones actually have some original investigation. So here is an excerpt from a book by Antonia Garces, who's a local author, and this is where he's quoting a woman named Jewel Sanchez, and she's summarizing the origin of the ghost story. And this is what she says. One Christmas day in 1974, there was a performance of some sort, and a member of the crew who was unaware of the donut tradition. Now you're probably wondering, Ben, what's about this donut tradition? We all love donuts. I'll get to that. So they were unaware of a donut tradition. They saw the collection of sweets hanging on the water pipe and placed them in the trash. I was told, that is, Jewel Sanchez was told, that as soon as they were removed, all sorts of weird and negative stuff began to happen. Anything that could go wrong did go wrong. Props which had been well anchored to the floor toppled over as if intentionally pushed by invisible hands. Electrical cables blew up in a storm of sparks and flashes. While going through the live performance, the actors tripped and fell over an invisible object. Some actors stated that their fall felt as if it was caused by a pair of invisible hands that quickly but firmly pushed them to the floor. Yes, you can see how scary this might be. Dane Mayfield, who's a reporter for the Albuquerque Journal, described the consequences. He said, the entire cast forgot to show up. Stage lights were popping. Once they got there, the actors forgot their lines, and doors and windows were opening, closing. Once the donuts were replaced and Bobby was appeased, the incidents miraculously stopped. So let me circle back to the donuts, because, again, who doesn't love donuts? I could use a donut right now. So the story is that, and I'll get to more of this in a second, but the idea is that in many ghost stories, there's a theme of doing something for the ghost. And this is fairly common in folklore, where there will be some entity that needs to be appeased. So, for example, when I investigated a lake monster in Lake Okanagan, Ogopogo in British Columbia, there was a legend that local Indians who would cross this particular piece of water, this lake, would leave sacrifices for the lake monster. So they would drop in some fruit. Sometimes they would sacrifice an animal, a chicken or a puppy, something like that, and be allowed safe passage. The idea is, of course, if you just give some token of respect to the powerful entity, whether it's a lake monster or a ghost or whatever else, it will leave you alone and let you go on your way. And we see this exact same motif in this ghost story. So the chemo theater ghost includes one of the most famous cases of public poltergeist activity everywhere. As I mentioned a minute ago, most ghostly activity is pretty minor. Again, it's missing keys, it's a weird sound, it's a weird smell, it's something that isn't dramatic or anything particularly interesting, just sort of ordinary, mundane things that are interpreted as ghostly in a specific context. This is very different, because if the story is true, he said advisedly, then you had, if it's true that an entire performance of a play was ruined by a ghost, supernaturally ruined, then you should have dozens or hundreds of witnesses, right? This isn't just one person saying they heard something weird late at night in their house. This is the public theater with, cast members, crew members, audience members, all who presumably saw this and documented it. Maybe they photographed it. Who knows? So if the story is true, the chemo theater ghost would be one of the best documented poltergeist cases in history, right here in my own hometown. So this was, of course, intriguing to me, because I'm like, yeah, this is interesting. Let's dig into this. So I, along with a co-investigator named Mike Smith, decided to dig into our local mystery. So we wanted to interview Jewel Sanchez, who's quoted a minute ago as having experienced all these sorts of things. Sanchez is no longer there, but something even better, which is Dennis Potter, who is the local who's the technical manager. He was there, and he was there that night. And this is a photograph of Dennis and I in the chemo theater. You can see the seats in the background. You can't see too much of the architecture, but that's sort of what it looks like. And in between us, for those who are fans of the stage, that's a ghost light. So a little bit of humor there. So there I am investigating the chemo theater ghost, and there is Dennis Potter. And he was the technical director currently as of today, and also back at the time. So this guy you're looking in the center of the screen was a witness to this performance. So not only did Potter confirm the basic details of the story, but he, as I said, he was there that night. So I'm like, wow, this is certainly a much more interesting, compelling case. And we interviewed him. He said it was just before Christmas, and the New Mexico Repertory Theater did A Christmas Carol, the Dickens play. And this is where the donuts come in. So he said the director, Andrew Shea, noticed donuts being strung up against a brick wall. Again, the idea being that a tradition emerged where people, particularly actors, would leave donuts originally, and later different trinkets, for the ghost to make the boy ghost happy. Because what boy ghost doesn't love donuts? I mean, or what boy doesn't love donuts? What anybody who doesn't love donuts? And the story goes, as Dennis and others said, that when Andrew Shea saw these donuts, he said, "Well, this is ridiculous. This is a Dickens play. This is a Christmas Carol. If you watch production of the Christmas Carol, part of the background is not donuts everywhere. This is not Willy Wonka. This is Dickens. This is strictly Dickensian. Literally, there's no donuts in this. He goes, take all this down," and everyone's like, "Don't take the donuts down. You're going to piss off the ghost." And he did it anyway. And well, according to Potter, about 10 or 15 minutes into the show, weird things started going wrong. And I quote this so that you can compare this to what Jewel Sanchez mentioned in the passage a few minutes ago. Dennis says people were forgetting their lines, they were tripping and falling on stage, pieces of equipment would fall from the ceiling, light bulbs exploded. Electrical cables fell down. Light gels fluttered down during the performance. Windows and doors on the set were either opening or not opening, or opening when they weren't supposed to. Dennis said it was just really weird. They almost literally didn't get through the show. There were so many disruptions. And this is a photograph of the shrine to little Bobby Darnall, the ghost in the chemo theater. It's changed a bit since then, but you can see it's this little nook. It's actually very small. It's maybe about a meter and a half by 2, and it's in a little stairwell. It's kind of hard to get a photograph of it because it's sort of tucked away, but this is what's there now. So the donuts are long gone for health reasons, as you can imagine. Having donuts all over a theater is not that brings in the rats, which is Dickensian. But so people to this day, people leave little trinkets for Bobby. So as you can see, there's little knickknacks, little tokens, photographs, notes, toys, things like that. So when Mike and I were investigating the chemo theater ghost, we were, number one, surprised to actually find a first-hand eyewitness, right? Because a lot of times when you're investigating ghost stories and ghost reports, it becomes this sort of wild goose chase, what folklorists call a folk tale, a friend of a friend tale, right? So someone says, "Yeah, there's a ghost here." Like, "Oh, how do I find out more about it?" Well, my cousin's friend's gardener saw something there, and then when you go talk to the cousin friend's gardener, they say, "No, I didn't see it, but my ex-girlfriend's brother, his mechanic saw it." So you get this sort of like this never-ending horizon of evidence that keeps going and going and going. But in this case, allegedly, we had one, if not more, eyewitnesses to it. And so the fact that we actually had someone telling us about it was interesting, and sort of gave us more fuel for investigating. So part of the story, as I said, is that that something happened, right? Whether it's Bobby's ghost or an earthquake, or I don't know, but apparently something weird ruined this play, right? Because that's what we're being told of a Christmas Carol, 1974. So in investigating this case, one of the first things that I did was establishing a timeline. So when exactly was this? Because we're trying to sort of get more, we're sort of trying to translate more amorphous, just so stories to, okay, give me the details: who, what, where, when, why, and how, right? Investigators need something tangible to work from. So the first step in investigating it was to verify the date. So according to several sources, including, as I mentioned, Antonio Garces in his book Adobe Angels, the doomed performance of Christmas Carol occurred on Christmas, 1974. So the problem is with this little bit of information is that by consulting newspapers in 1974, at the time, the chemo theater was an adult theater. It was known as Albuquerque's only 35 millimeter giant screen adult theater. It was known as the Notorious Chemo. At the time, they were playing a film titled Teenage Fantasies. And I can't tell you the name of the second feature because it says literally title Too Hot to Print. And then, of course, there's a typo in there because, of course, there is. Couples always welcome. So this was odd, right? Because there's no Dickens going on, at least not the Charles kind. So I said, "Well, Dennis, I'm confused because we're being told this happened in 1974, but it was an adult theater in 74. There wasn't a Christmas Carol going." He says, "Oh, no, they got that detail wrong." He says, No, it was in the late 80s or early 90s. Which was odd to me because he didn't know the decade, right? I mean, I think memory is fallible. I'm aware of that. I have a degree in psychology, and this is something that skeptics and others deal with. But I think I would probably remember at least what decade this had happened, if I had experienced some awe-inspiring, once-in-a-lifetime, supernaturally ruined play. But whatever. I mean, whatever. So we said, okay, Dennis, we're trying to track down the story. He said, well, let me think about it. So eventually we narrowed it down to December 1986. And the way we did that, parenthetically, was that some of the children in the play were late to a rehearsal and actually performance because they had seen a Star Wars movie. And so, or sorry, a Star Trek film. I think it was Radford. I forget which one it was, but whichever one they said, yeah, the kids were late. It was one that came out in December '86, and that's how we tracked it down to December '86. So once we did that, we could identify which performance it was, interview people who were actually involved that day, besides Dennis. So we tracked down the actor that played Bob Cratchit. And I said, his name is Stephen Schwartz. And I said, Mr. Schwartz, I understand you're part of this performance that was ruined by this ghost. The lights were exploding. All these things happened. And he said, quote, "It went great. It was a wonderful performance." I said, okay, well, we may be talking about different things, because the story is that you were on stage and the lights were exploding and props were falling over and people were tripping over being pushed over by unseen hands and everything that could go wrong. And I told him the whole story. He said, well, that sounds like good copy, but I can't corroborate any of that. He said, I don't remember any problems like that or any problems with the show. So this is odd, right? So we have an actor who we know was there on stage at the time who's saying that nothing unusual happened, and we have the technical director who was also there at the time, who, along with others, is saying that little Bobby Darnell's ghost ruined the performance. So we said, okay, well, all right, well, but again, memory is fallible. I know that. Psychologists know that. It's a known thing. Maybe somebody got it wrong. So we interviewed somebody else. We interviewed Andrew Shea, who was the director that I mentioned earlier, who had ordered the donuts be taken down. And he was there, and he directed the performance, and he also disputed Potter's recollection. He said, quote, "I don't remember it being a disaster in any way." And once again, I told Andrew, I said, well, the story is that there was this infamously ruined performance by a ghost poltergeist in front of you and audience and the cast and crew. And he says, in terms of that day that Dennis is talking about, no, I don't recall anything supernatural out of the ordinary at all. So at this point, I'm becoming more and more convinced that there's something fishy with the story. And probably the story is almost certainly not true. And then the question then became up, well, hold on here. I've been hearing, and Mike and I had been hearing about this story every Halloween for years. The Chemo Theater Ghost. It's a famous ghost story. There's TV shows about it. There's book chapters about it. There's magazine articles about it. It's a known thing. So why is it that there's so many accounts apparently got it wrong? And the answer is that Dennis Potter is the source of virtually all the information. So every Halloween, the journalists go back to Dennis and they say, Dennis, tell us about Bobby Darnell's ghost in the Chemo Theater. And Dennis says, well, since you asked, this is what happened. And the journalists had never bothered to do any, journalism, any investigation. They're like, well, they just would cut and paste. And of course, the problem was even worse among ghost hunters. So you had ghost hunters and ghost investigators who would promote the story without bothering to do any independent research because they're more interested in telling a spooky story. And I saw this over and over and over again in the Chemo Theater case, where I would come across some story or some fact that was clearly lifted from some other writer who lifted it from some other writer. And so you have some factoid that's in 4 or 5 or 6 different places that doesn't appear anywhere in the original sources. So then the question is, okay, well, is there any other way to corroborate this, right? Because Andrew Shea was there. He says nothing happened. The actor, the babe Cratchit, Schwartz is there. He says nothing happened. So what about the audience, right? So there may be different recollections among the cast. But again, if this actually happened, again, this was in front of an audience, right? I mean, there should be hundreds of people that saw this. And there's really no way to know who was in the audience. I mean, we can't go back to 1986, and they don't take names at the time. These days, you might be able to with online ticketing, but certainly back then, there was no way to have the names. So I said, okay, let's go back to the archives. Let's go back to the newspaper. So I looked in the Albuquerque Journal, the Albuquerque Tribune at the time, and again, nothing there. No reports of Ghost ruins performance of Christmas Carol, which would frankly be good news. Well, it wouldn't be news. It would be news. It would be good news. It'd be good news for me because I have something to go with. We contacted Ollie Reed Jr., who's a drama critic for the Tribune, and I asked him. I said, "Well, if anybody would have heard about this ghost haunted performance, it'd be you." He said, "I don't recall any stories about that or anything related to that production." So ultimately, one of the reasons I find this story really fascinating, and it's really worth sort of digging into, I think, is that the chemo theater story goes, it's not a lie. It's not a hoax. But it's also not true. So from what I can tell, and I interviewed Dennis, and again, he's there to this day. He's a likable guy. He's very open, very candid, very friendly. He genuinely believes that he was there when this ruined performance happened from this ghost. The problem is that nobody else who was there remembers it. And so I don't think, I have no reason to think that that Dennis is lying. I don't think he's trying to drum up publicity for the theater. He's not making money off of it. It's just a story that he's told over and over and over again. And so that's I think what happened with that. So you had journalists and ghost hunters who would repeat the stories and then run with it. And I'll do a little Q&A afterwards if anybody has any questions on it. But I was my investigation of the chemo theater ghost was appeared on television and also in the local newspaper. And a guy named Larry Barker is the cameraman. And there I am in the chemo theater with an EMF detector, which is a device that many ghost hunters use because they believe that if they sense an electromagnetic field, which was given off by anything electrical, then that's evidence of a ghost. So the second case I'm going to talk about is the Santa Fe courthouse ghost. And this is another ghost investigation. Again, it's a fairly well known one here in New Mexico. It got a fair amount of attention at the time, and this is sort of a ghost of a different type. So here's an image of this weird ghost figure that was seen crossing a screen on a surveillance camera footage at a courthouse in Santa Fe, which is the capital of New Mexico. It's about an hour north of here. And I have a video of it. We're going to see if we can show it to you in motion, but just here until then, here's a screen capture of it. And it's this little odd round thing. It's basically a glowing something. And keep in mind that's pretty common for ghosts, right? So oftentimes when people say they experienced a ghost, what they mean is they had an experience they can't explain that for whatever reason they've labeled a ghost. So the word the label ghost is really sort of a negative definition. It doesn't tell you anything. If someone tells me I saw a ghost, that doesn't help me out. I say, well, what how are you interpreting the word ghost? How are you using that word? And help me understand, because again, they could mean that they saw some ghostly sort of classic apparition, the Scooby-Doo ghost with the with the eyes and the sheets, or it could just mean that they saw something weird on a video screen, or it could be that they had a vision of a recently departed loved one at the foot of their bed. So there's just this impossibly wide variety of ghosts phenomena that people label ghosts. And so, in that sense, just calling something a ghost is it's not helpful from an investigative point of view. So you always have to ask people, what do you mean by that? In this case, there was this image that was seen. Here's a shot, and again, you can actually, this is actually a better image here. You see in the bottom part there, just below the police car, you can see this especially bright spot, and that's what was being seen. And so initially, this image was seen early in the morning. I think it was about 7:26 in the morning. Actually, there's a time right there in the left-hand corner, 7:27 a.m. at the El Catron courthouse. And so what happened was that a deputy went in there that morning and was reviewing the footage, and he saw this weird, ghostly object move across the screen and go off. So he didn't hear any moaning. He didn't see any humans, and nobody do anything. That's what he saw. And so again, it made a lot of news. It was actually on the front page of the Santa Fe New Mexican, and I got called into the case because the reporter Jason Oslander, who wrote the piece there on the right hand side there, contacted me. He said, Mr. Radford, I know you do science-based investigations from folklore perspective or else. What do you know about ghosts? I'm like, well, what do you want to know? How much time do you have? He says, well, have you investigated ghost videos and photographs? I said, yeah, sure. So he sent me a clip of it, and I watched it over and over again. I probably watched it 30 or 40 times, just slowing it down, trying to look at different theories. And he said, what do you think it is? I said, well, I don't know. I said, well, you tell me what people are thinking it is. So there are a couple. One of them was that it was the image of a murdered man. Now, again, this is a courthouse. And as it turns out, there was a man that was killed in a shootout at the courthouse, which by itself is not that unusual. I mean, it's courthouse, jails. It's not common, but I mean, it's more likely there would be somebody who died in a shootout at a courthouse or jail than maybe a local amusement park. Some people thought it was a glitch. Some people thought it was a hoax. Some people thought it was a spider. Some people thought it was a reflection from a passing car. And so just all sorts of different things. So as soon as I heard about the story, I said, okay, well, let me look into it. Let me see what I can do. Send me the footage. And at the time, this was being widely discussed all over the place. So it was online. It was going viral videos. People were talking about it. There were thousands of armchair investigators across the country, in some cases around the world, who were all opining from behind their keyboards about what it was. It's a hoax. It's this. It's that. Whatever else. And I said, okay, well, I live an hour from this. I've been asked to investigate. Let me go investigate. So I went there, and this is what the scene looks like when you're there. On the left hand is the surveillance camera that recorded the footage, that recorded the ghost. On the right hand is the police car, and you can sort of, let me back up. You can sort of see the tree there and the police car. I'm not sure if it's exactly the same position, but it's fairly close. You can also see the railing in the back, and the tree in the car. So it's either the same police car or it's parked in the same place. And so I was looking at it, and so I was trying to figure out, okay, well, what's going on here? So I went to the scene. I took measurements. I said, okay, well, this is, how high up is the camera? How far away is it? I wanted to gather all the details on that. And when I was trying to figure out what this image was, there are a couple things that jumped out at me. One is that nothing in the video is in focus. As you can see, that's a screenshot. That's a photograph of the video. And if I can in a minute, I'll show you the whole video. But as you can see, nothing's in focus. They need to buy Windex. I don't know. I would just it's like, come on, guys. One reason you're having these problems is that you guys need to clean the camera lens. I don't think they appreciated the suggestion, but in any event, so I'm trying to, okay, well, what is this thing? So, one immediate question was how big is it? Right. So how far away from the camera is it? Is it something that's small and near the camera? Is it something that's large and away from the camera? It's very difficult to tell, right? So if this is, for all we know, it's right next to the ground and it's 2 feet wide and some glowing ball of something that that would presumably be seen by passersby. And keep in mind, this is 7:30 in the morning. This is when people are commuting. There's a road nearby, so it would be interesting if to interview people who are going by and did anybody going to work see this big glowing ball? And there was no sense of that. So instead, it seemed more likely that whatever it was small and closer to the camera than being large and far away. So I conducted some experiments. So I'm trying to figure, okay, well, how am I going to solve this case? People are talking about it. Again, it's being discussed on YouTube, online, and everywhere else. I was the only person there actually investigating. So I was like, I was kind of in a unique case where I had the background investigation, and I was the only one that bothered to show up and actually do investigations and interview people and do it. Everybody else was just talking about it. So as I always do, I try and list the possibilities, right? So one possibility is it's a ghost, right? It's possible. Science doesn't rule anything out. Science is always tentative. Science, the consensus about science is only as good as the latest evidence. So things that we thought were true 20 years ago or 50 years ago can be overturned if further experiments tomorrow or next month give compelling evidence that those are wrong. So I've never said outright, point blank, the ghost cannot exist, because that's not scientific. Ghosts can exist. There's just not good evidence for them. And so when I'm making a list of possibilities for what this could be, ghost is on the list. It's just way, way, way down, and you have to look at more plausible explanations using Occam's razor. So the two ones that I thought were most plausible were either floating cottonwood seed or insects. Now, cottonwood seeds, here in Rio Rancho and Krause and Albuquerque, where I grew up, there are lots of cottonwood trees, and they're these big, tall, regal trees. And during some parts of the year, including this time of the year, they open up and little fluffs of cotton pop out. And sometimes they're a hazard. They actually can be flammable. So there have been fires that have been started by someone accidentally self-setting a cigarette and they get lit up. But they float through the air, oftentimes during the day, and they don't look like ghosts, but they can look a little odd, white glowing things sort of floating through the air and going to the ground. The second explanation of that was probably insects, and I had done other investigations that show that in some cases, photographs and videos can be of insects under certain conditions. So I began by trying to do an experiment with a cottonwood tree, and so I got some cottonwood, and there are cottonwood trees nearby. So it's not as if there's no cottonwood trees within a mile. I mean, there are cotton trees literally above the camera. So this was a plausible theory. So fortunately or not, the media showed up. So I'm going to see if I can play a clip. I don't know whether it will work or not because the interface here is sketchy, but if I can, I will show you a brief clip of a TV crew that showed up just as I was beginning my experiments.
There is no dispute this ball of light on the right hand of your screen is mysterious. When guards saw it on a surveillance camera Friday, talk immediately turned to ghosts. After all, there is an old Indian burial ground right across the street, and a man was once killed outside the courthouse. But Benjamin Radford believes this light is actually something very normal.
What's more likely? Is it more likely that it's a ghost or that it's, a piece of flying lint?
Radford calls himself a real ghostbuster.
What we do is we try to bring a scientific explanation to mysterious and strange phenomena.
He came to the courthouse today to try an experiment.
Try to figure out what the angle would be.
Armed with a tape measure, a homemade tool, some cotton, and...
It might be a moth or some sort of bug. So I brought a little moth with me.
He loads up.
All right, here we go.
And fires. Radford tries to recreate what he believes happened Friday.
In this case, my best guess is that it was a piece of flying cotton or something from the trees around here. See, some of those, you get the right wind, there's your ghost.
But what does it look like on surveillance tape? Here it is. See that dark ball float across your screen? That is the cotton that Radford blew. So why isn't it glowing?
What was the condition last Friday at 7:30 in the morning is not the same condition this morning at 7:30 or right now or any other time. So what you have to do is you have to try to make it as close as you can and then try to infer the other variables.
So it appears the question remains, is this a ghost, cotton, a bug, or something else? It seems we may never know. Kim Baez, KRQE News 13.
So we may never know, they say. Did that clip play for you guys? Oh, good. I'm glad. Excellent. Okay, so I'm glad you got to see the thing in action. So I actually generally don't like to have news media looking behind my back and over my shoulder while I'm investigating for a couple reasons. One is that I'm trying to investigate. I'm trying to solve a mystery. I don't necessarily want to explain what I'm doing over else. It's oftentimes they're sort of in your way, but nevertheless, I mean, they were there. I wasn't going to not talk to them. The other reason I often don't like to talk to reporters halfway through an investigation is that, as happened in this case, they were there for the first part of my investigation. They weren't there for the second part of the investigation. So I'm actually glad they were there because it documented some of the stuff I was doing in terms of the investigating the fluff. But I returned the next day to do more experiments because they were right, and that was correct. The image that we see on the screen does not. It looks in some ways kind of similar, but it didn't really act it in the same way. So that was not a failed experiment. In fact, that was successful. That was a successful experiment because I demonstrated it probably was not the cottonwood fluff. So it wasn't a failure at all. It was good news because we can probably rule that one out. So then the second thing is, okay, well, could it be an insect or a spider or something coming from across it? And some people said that, well, no, it's ridiculous. The skeptics always go to that explanation, blah, blah, blah. It said, it doesn't look like a bug. And I said, well, of course it doesn't look like a bug, because if it looked like a bug, it wouldn't be a ghost, right? That's how this works. If it were obvious what it was, then there would be no mystery to it. So yes, it doesn't obviously look like a bug, because then we would know it's a bug. So, it's true that it doesn't look like a bug that we're assuming that it would look, but that's not, that by itself doesn't mean anything. Nevertheless, it did need some more explanation. So I suspected that and I'll for reasons I'll have some time for a Q&A. So if you want to get more details about the experiment, I'll talk about it. But one of the factors here, again, was trying to determine, is that glowing thing glowing? Is it emitting light or is it reflecting light? And this is actually an approach that I took more recently in Skeptical Inquirer magazine. I investigated the eye shine of a creature called Mothman. And Mothman is a famous American cryptid monster creature in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, that's said to have glowing red eyes. And a couple issues back in Skeptical Inquirer magazine, I published some experiments where I demonstrated the difference between light emitting eyes and light reflecting eyes. Anyway, and that same process was at work here. So I didn't think that from my analysis of the video, the object that we're seeing is not emitting light. It's not casting a shadow on something else. It's reflecting light coming from somewhere else. So I'm thinking, well, it's probably a bug. I don't know that it is. I'm willing to consider that it's not, but having done investigation and done experiments to see if it was cottonwood fluff, the next thing is, well, how do I see if it's a bug? Now, this was a bit more tricky than you might imagine, because I'm like, okay, well, first of all, the camera is, I think it was 12, 13 feet high. Number two, how do I test this? Do we just throw bugs at it? I mean, so even when you suspect it's probably a bug, as I did, there's still practical ways of trying to test this. So I'm scratching my head trying to figure out, okay, where do I get bugs? How do I test this? Well, I remembered that ladybugs are sold at nurseries, at tree nurseries. And so I went and got some ladybugs. I paid $8.99 for it. Just parenthetically, because I did consider this to be a business expense, on my taxes that year, I did itemize ladybugs for ghost investigation on my IRS taxes. I was not audited, which surprised me. But in any event, so I'm thinking, okay, well, how do I do this? So I went to my mom's house, and she has a pool, and so I got one for pool scraper things, aluminum or aluminium, I guess, depending where you are, that expands. And so I dumped a bunch of ladybugs onto this jerry rig thing, and I'm like, well, I don't know if this is going to work or not, but I don't know what else to do. So this is not X-Files, guys. This is how real world ghost investigation is. So I dumped a bunch of ladybugs, as many as I could, onto the exact same camera, and I did this importantly at the same time. I don't know if you know this or not, but there was a time code on the video where I'm doing the cottonwood fluff experiments, and the time code, I think it's like 11:40, 11:50 in the afternoon, just before noon. In this case, I was after I went home and sort of reconsidered my approaches to the investigation, I returned the next day at the accurate time, because the position of the sun is important, things like that. So I went back at around 7:30 in the morning, again, the same time that the bug had appeared, and I did that. And while some of the images of the ladybugs were obviously too large and dark to be the culprit, at 7:26 a.m., which is nearly to the minute when the original ghost was recorded, it appeared. And using the insects, I duplicated the image. Unfortunately, they didn't save the image, so I don't have what it looks like, but it looks like what was on the screen. So it's not just my opinion. Everybody in the courthouse is like, "Wow, you're right." I mean, that's that's what it is in every respect. The movement, the shape, the color, the size, everything matched. But there was still one question: why wasn't the bug huge and dark instead of small and light? And this is actually what an image looks like. This is the image. This is a real life image. This is not doctored. When the shuttle Atlantis was taking off, prior to launch, a spider walked across the camera, and it looked like something out of a horror film, a giant spider silhouette eating the Atlantis. So the question is, okay, well, why didn't it look like that? And it's a fair question. It was something I had to tackle for myself. I had to answer for myself before I could justify to myself that I actually solved it, because the image was identical in every respect, except that it wasn't that doesn't explain why it was glowing. So in order to explain why it was glowing, I went back to the camera, and again, this is the actual camera, the surveillance camera that recorded the image. And as you can see, you've maybe been, because you're a smart lot, because you're Sydney Skeptics, Australian Skeptics. You may be able to figure out why exactly the image would look different, and the answer is that, of course, you have to think about where was the bug. The bug was not on the camera lens. The bug was on the outside casing that contains the camera lens. So as you can see in that image, it's still filthy. They still haven't bought any Windex apparently, but the camera is inside that casing. So there's an outer casing which is subjected to the elements and wind and dirt, whatever else, and then inside that, about 3/4 of an inch in, is the camera itself, and so that distance creates the difference. So the reason it looked like it was purposely moving and not floating, it was blurry because it's close to the security camera's lens, and it's glowing, importantly, because the direct morning sunlight is hitting it from a low angle, and this is exactly what you see. So because it was the sunlight was hitting it at a low angle from a distance from the camera, that's what it was. So this was one of my higher profile cases. It was carried. The story was carried by the Associated Press. And so this is revealed to be a bug, and I was pleased that I had managed to solve the case. And as it turns out, there's actually a Wikipedia page. I don't know if Susan Gerbic or someone else did it, but there's much to my surprise and amusement, somebody created a Wikipedia page talking about the San Diego ghost and my experiments and everything else like that. So with that, I will wrap up with a plug for one of my several books, Investigating Ghosts, which again talks about a lot of this investigations. And of course, there are me and my co-host, Celestia Ward and Pascal Romero of Squaring the Strange podcast.
Ben, what a fantastic talk. I love it. I mean, I've done vaguely similar things myself over the years, and I've even investigated a ghost which turned out to be a moth near a camera at nighttime, so I can really relate to that. We've had some questions coming in, but I know it's ridiculous hour for you, so
I'll take a few. I'll take a few. I'm happy to talk to you guys. This is fun.
This is fun.
But sleep, right? I'll sleep on bed, as the great Warren Zevon.
You can keep your answers quite brief if you want. That's quite all right. The first question that's come in, somebody asks, have you ever been scared in a haunted house?
That's a good question. And the answer is yes, on two levels. You know, we're all human, and we're all on some level afraid of the dark. Even when we're not kids, the dark is inherently scary because humans, we need our eyesight to see things. We don't know what's in the dark. It's primeval, right? It's when you get away from the campfire, you don't know what's out there, and so it's natural. Even to a skeptic, and I don't mean to sound standoffish, but even to somebody who's done this for a long time, yeah, under the conditions that people are looking for ghosts in unfamiliar locations at night, it's often cold. Yeah, there can be times when it's unnerving. I wasn't scared because I saw something unexplainable and terrifying. I was scared because, it was 3 a.m, sort of like it is right now, 4 a.m. And it was dark, and you hear something. The other time that I have been frightened, and not like super frightened, but just sort of unnerved, is when other people are there, particularly ghost hunters who themselves are approaching it from a less than skeptical perspective. For example, I can think of a couple occasions when I've been in a place and ghost hunters are there and they're praying. They have the rosary. They believe in demons, right? And so the source of my concern was usually other people. It was other people that believed that anything they hear or experience is some demonic entity or something that's going to harm them, because they're oftentimes a bit scary people. So that's the case.
All right. Well, I remember that when I was in visiting you in Albuquerque, we had sort of a half plan to go to Roswell to do some investigations. We never got around to it, but we promised ourselves we would one day.
We did.
The next question, no, we will do it. The next question comes in saying, "G'day, Ben. Have you ever seen anything supposedly moved by a ghost?"
Ooh, another good question. I have not. I have been at locations. There's a couple I can think of. One off the top of my head is Fort George in Ontario, Canada, and it's actually one of the chapters in my Investigating Ghosts book, where I was there with a TV crew and less than skeptical ghost hunters, if I can package that together. And they were trying to provoke a ghostly activity, and they would put out what are called trigger items. One of them was a teddy bear, and so they would put a teddy bear. They would put a teddy bear out, and they would say, "If there's a ghost here, move the teddy bear." And of course, the teddy bear is a teddy bear, so it's not doing anything. Then they say, "Okay, well." So one of them says, "Okay, well, let's we'll come back later." I said, "Okay, well, are you going to photograph this? Because we're not going to remember exactly. You can say, oh, it moved a quarter of an inch. Did it? Did it really?" So we had the idea to put a piece of paper on it and trace the outline with pencil and put it right in the center. And that way, if the teddy bear moved, because of course it doesn't want to do it when a skeptic's around because they're shy. So if it had moved significantly, and of course, assuming that nobody had faked anything, and under other circumstances, I might have set up a camera to monitor it to make sure that, so I could catch anybody if they had tried to do that. And that's a whole other topic. But anyway, so the short answer is no, I've never seen that. I've seen people who've tried to get ghosts to move objects. I would love to be in a allegedly haunted location and see that happen. I would find it fascinating, and I would rush to it and investigate it. But unfortunately, I'm not aware of any real good evidence of any of that, which is odd because a lot of ghost hunters say this happens all the time. If you talk to ghost hunters, like, "Oh, I've been doing this for 20 years now, and let me tell you, back 4 years ago, I was investigating this thing, and I was in this place, and this clock, jumped across the room." I'm like, "That's interesting. Do you have video of that?" "Well, no, we don't have video footage of that." Like, anybody else see it? "Well, no one else." What are we talking about here?
That's right. It reminds me, if she turned me into a newt, well, I got better. Now, a few more questions and we'll let you go, Ben. Here's the next question. What did cause the explosion at the chemo?
Oh, good question. So it was a boiler explosion. So the hot water heater that was supplying the concession stand, there was a faulty valve. And unfortunately, it just happened to explode right when Bobby Darnell was just happened to be going right past it. There are other people injured in the case. One person was blinded. He's the only person that died. Bobby did. And I'll tell you one other quick aspect of that, which was interesting, was that when I was investigating the chemo theater story, as I mentioned, a lot of local ghost hunters had gone there because it's a draw. Because famous New Mexico mystery, the ghost hunters, they all want to go in there. They want to do their investigation, the EVP, do this and that, and say, "Oh, we investigated, blah blah blah." And several times, I saw people. They would go. They'd do their investigation, and they would take photographs as ghost hunters do, and they would take lots and lots of photos. And in one case, they saw an orb, or a sort of glowing thing, sort of like what we saw in the San Nicolas ghost case. And it was over the staircase. It's a 2-level theater, of course. And they said, well, look at this. This is evidence, because if you look at this photograph, and of course it's one of hundreds they took. They just happened to pick this one, of course. If you look right here, this glowing thing, that's Bobby's ghost, because that's where he died. And there are a couple of problems with this. The most fundamental problem with this is that had the ghost hunters done any research, they would have found out that Bobby didn't die there. He was injured there, but if you read the newspaper accounts at the time, he was living when they left in an ambulance. So Bobby didn't die at the chemo theater. He died at the hospital. So that orb, that round thing that you're saying must be Bobby's ghost where he died, not his ghost, and not where he died.
Well, those orbs, they do get around.
They do.
Look, Ben, couple more questions, then we'll let you go. I'll combine a couple of questions here. There are numerous people asking about they're likening you to the Scooby-Doo kids.
Well, I'm flattered.
Do you get that?
Well, I'm guessing more Velma. Yeah, it was interesting. I grew up on Scooby-Doo. It's sort of an iconic skeptical thing. Of course, later on they turned into real ghosts, which I'm still a bit annoyed about. But yeah, I like the Mystery Inc. gang. My friend Kenny Biddle is a big fan as well. I've always in Carl Sagan's book, The Demon Haunted World, he mentions that as being a sort of a good model for skeptics to do. And I wish it were that easy. I wish I could find the ghost and be ready to rip off the mask dramatically in the last scene. Gold Potters or Sonny and Cher, whoever happened to be around.
That's right.
In a moment, but
all right. Well, Ben, look, let's wrap it up. There are some more questions, but I'm sure everybody understands. It's almost, my goodness me, I think it's coming up to 4:22 in the morning for you at the moment. So you've really...
Yeah, well.
It was a lot easier than flying here at the moment.
It was. I figured Richard, you're a long and dear friend of mine, and more than once I have seen you at a conference. I'm like, that looks like Richard. He's moving like Richard, but much slower.
Yeah.
Doesn't acknowledge anybody, and because you're in jet lag, and as I recall, your pattern was to the minute as you're getting over jet lag is when you return. It
happened. It did happen sometimes. That's right. And here is what I picked up at the airport in Albuquerque.
Yeah,
the alien dice from Roswell. That's quite
of course.
That's quite fun. Now, Ben, before you go, where can people go to find out more about you and maybe buy some of your wonderful books?
Yes, thank you. I am on the Facebook, as they say. I'm no longer on the MySpace. People can find my podcast, Squaring the Strange, as I mentioned, and which you very kindly mentioned on your own fine podcast on more than one occasion. I'm around and about. I do articles for Skeptical Inquirer magazine. And elsewhere. And as it happens, I actually do have a new book coming out in the next few weeks titled Big If True. And it's a collection of my Skeptical Inquirer columns that I've written in SI over the past 15 years or something. And so it's basically people write into the magazine and sort of either believer or skeptics, whoever it is, and say, what about this? And so it's sort of a reader interaction thing. And so in each issue, I try and concisely as I can answer questions. And so finally I decided, well, why not go ahead and collect them all into a book? And so again, it's Big If True, Adventures in Oddity, and it should be out in the next few weeks.
Excellent. Well, look, again, Ben Radford, all the way over there in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Many thanks for being here with us in Sydney for Skeptics in the Pub. Folks, don't forget, the next time we can all be together, I think, would be the Skepticon 2020, the Australian Skeptics National Convention. Lots of international and local speakers. Go to skepticon.org.au. Keep your eye on the meetup page for Sydney Skeptics in the Pub to see who our next speaker will be in November. But for this evening and the morning, where you are in Radford, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. It was wonderful to see you guys.